Oh, do I read the synopsis too? Oh, no.
Well, that I was just leaving a gap. That's where I'll put in a little clip, and then you want to come back and do the synopsis?
Yeah.
Or not, whatever.
Yeah.
Everything's a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy.
Deja vu.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Deja Reviewed podcast, where we talk about the original versions of TV shows and movies that were later rebooted. In Season 2, we're discussing the first and only season of the original Battlestar Galactica. I'm Michael.
And I'm Mark.
And today we're discussing episode 1/3 of the first season. It was a 3-part movie. So
I'm going to be really glad when we're through this episode, so then at least we can get to some normal episode titles instead of this is sort of called this and sort of called that, and then maybe it's part 3.
So it's sort of called Saga of a Star World Part 3, or if you're watching on NBC.com, it's called Battlestar Galactica Part 3. And Saga of a Star World was originally aired on September 17th, 1978. It was directed by Richard A. Cola and Alan J. Levi, written by Glenn A. Larson, and starring Richard Hatch, Dirk Benedict, and Lorne Green.
Green Leader, I've got 2 more squadrons requesting permission to join us. Purple and Orange squadrons. They're just dying for a good fight, been on reconnaissance for centons. Purple and Orange? Negative, Blue Leader. Let's not get carried away. We've got all the manpower we need to knock out one base ship.
There are only 2 ships. It is a deception. Open fire and retreat from the planet.
And so the synopsis from IMDb is, after the 12 colonies of mankind were destroyed in a sneak attack
Wait, is this that same synopsis from the previous 2 episodes?
Yes, and it's also, so if you've noticed, the beginning of every single episode so far has been the exact same, so why not just keep repeating this? After the 12 colonies of mankind were destroyed in a sneak attack by the Cylon tyranny, the last Battlestar Galactica leads a makeshift fugitive fleet on a desperate search for the legendary planet Earth. Maybe it's getting more relevant.
Okay, so I'm going to give an actual synopsis of episode 3, which is, if you'll recall, end of episode 2, they were on the planet Carolon, which had this casino where everybody wins and unlimited food and stuff, and all the people were going to go down there and have a good time, and Commander Adama was suspicious. In this episode, we find out he had reason to be suspicious. It turns out it was a Cylon plot, and there's a battle at the end.
Very good. And on Carolon, there are these lizard people who...
No, they're not lizard people. They're insect people, because they look like lizard people, except the lizard people are apparently the people who created the Cylons.
Right. So are we positive at this point that these are not the Cylons, or not the people who well, and bear in mind that I think the lizard people are the Cylons. They created these presumably robots.
Yes. The Apollo said last time that the lizard people were the Cylons who created the robots, and then eventually they just started calling the robots the Cylons too, but all the lizard people are theoretically dead, which we got a surprise reveal in this episode. This whole episode is going to be spoiler alert for the 1978 show that you really don't want to watch anyway. That I thought their supreme leader was going to be like one of the last reptile people alive, and it turns out he was a robot.
Yes.
So that was a little bit of a surprise to me. I thought they were going in a different direction.
Agreed. And we have had to repeat that same synopsis for the past 3 episodes because this was one long movie that was split into the first 3 episodes. A couple of things about this opening. One, I actually timed it with the recap, the credits, and the repeated, now 3 times repeated opening narration. There isn't actual new content in this episode until the 4-minute and 22-second mark, and then it jumps right into a commercial on NBC.com. That's like 10% of the episode almost.
Yes, and you'll recall I timed that out on the last episode, and last episode it was 4 minutes and 11 seconds, so not only are they repeating that same 4+ minutes, it's getting longer and bleeding further and further into the content. By like the end of season 1, there's just going to be like, the whole thing is a recap, there's like 30 seconds of footage, and then they roll the end credits.
Well, and if they're going to recap it, they ended the last part, the second part, on the cliffhanger of the sort of revelation that Carolon had these evil insect things there. I think it's around where it ended. They didn't even bother having that big revelation recapped at the beginning of this episode, which I thought was kind of strange.
No, the recap was kind of strange. You know, I had a friend who used to work in Hollywood doing the recaps and the next time on for some series. That was his job, which was kind of interesting because there were certain shows that were big hits, and he would know what was going to happen like 6 episodes in advance because he had to know what things to set up in the next time on and make sure whatever the key plot points were that were going to pay off a couple episodes later stuck around in the previously ons and stuff. Anyway, one of the things that he had talked about when I was talking with him about his job is this idea of there's a lot that happens theoretically in an episode, and figuring out what are the key bits that are going to set you up for here's what you need to know for this upcoming episode when you're doing the previously on. And so it's not going to be every important plot thing that happened, some of which might pay off 2 or 3 episodes down the road. It's what are the things you need for this one. And I think, we're only 3 episodes in, but they have not done a very good job of that. As you mentioned, the sort of key reveal of the insect people. I think the episode ended last time with the elevator opening up and the people look and the woman screams, and they see something on,
Which happened like halfway through this episode.
Well, I was going to say they repeat exactly the same sequence and shots with a new woman screaming, but that seems like something that should have been the end of the previously on to set you up like what we saw and left you with this cliffhanger. And they're like, no, we're just going to forget about that cliffhanger.
And can I say, there's my shameless plug for the Bureau Boys. Go to thebureauboys.com to check out my other comedy podcast, improv comedy podcast. I was doing for a while previously on the Bureau Boys from our last episode, and it is super difficult to cut those things together to pull, okay, what do people need for this upcoming episode? And it's like, oh, well, here's a funny bit that I kind of want to put into this upcoming episode. By the way, there's a lot of funny bits. Check us out, bureauboys.com. There's a lot of thebureauboys.com, I should say. There's a lot of funny bits.
Yeah, if you're going to do a shameless plug, get your website right.
Yeah. There's a lot. We might have bureauboys.com too. Go to thebureauboys.com. But tell
you what, email Mike directly and he will email you back a link to the Bureau Boys.
Also on social media, we're at the Bureau Boys all over the place. But there's temptation to pull, oh, this was a really funny moment. Like you said, here was a really interesting plot point, but it doesn't really have anything to do with this information you're going to need from the current episode. And I didn't bother at all pulling from 2 and 3 episodes back. 1, because it's improv and we weren't really setting things up 3 episodes in advance. But 2, like it's difficult to go and be like, oh man, is someone going to jump into this in episode 3 and not have this subtext? Kind of like listening to Deja Reviewed. Is someone going to jump in right now in this episode? Should we be re-explaining what we're doing every single time other than the little blurb up top? At what point can we assume people have some background, some context to the show?
Yeah, and I think it makes a bigger difference. Like you said, you're doing an improv podcast where you're not setting things up with the plan. Like, look, I know in improv you like plant jokes and you're going to pay them off or repeat them throughout the episode or whatever. But you're not setting something up with the plan that like, oh, 8 episodes down the road, we're going to pull this thing back out and do this callback the same way you might in a live show from the beginning to the end. Because even someone who's a regular listener isn't going to remember, 2 months ago they set up that joke, right?
Totally.
But in a well-written TV show, and I will, at the moment, not comment on whether this falls under that category or not, but you might be setting things up to play out over the course of a season or such, and so that does make it even harder. I find it interesting, some of the shows that you watch that have really good recaps, you can tell, like, oh, which of the 20 plot threads in the air are they going to be playing with this one based on what they include and don't include in the recap? And oftentimes they will include stuff from several episodes back to kind of get you reconnected. I wonder if that's going to change in the new streaming and binge watching era because people are more likely to be watching things back to back. I remember growing up, and if something was set up 3 episodes ago, you might have seen that a month ago, and they kind of needed to just remind you, oh yeah, this was going on. You're like, oh yeah, and it's not that you hadn't been watching the show or paying attention. It's just, it was a month ago, and a lot has happened since then.
Absolutely. Speaking of not watching the show or paying attention, I might need a couple of plot points refreshed for you. But in regard to your last point, Mark, a recent example of something that I watched that is definitely worth watching and is available on Amazon Prime Video is The Americans. Which is that great Carrie Russell, and I always forget the guy's name, her husband, play these Russian spies who are infiltrated. It's Cold War America, but these Russian spies have infiltrated.
I have not watched it, but I hear great things about it.
It's fantastic. I think it was originally FX. It's a great show. So for sure worth watching. But they do a really good job just in recent memory of something that does a really good job of pulling stuff back. And just like you said, it's kind of interesting being like, oh, they clearly have queued up this thread, because there's a ton of threads running throughout the whole series. Oh, clearly we're going to see this is going to get advanced. This plot point's going to get advanced. I will say, Mark, just to sort of jump ahead a little bit, I enjoyed this episode a lot more than the first 2 episodes and kind of enjoyed it a little bit.
I'm actually glad you said that, Mike, because I was going to say, we should get to this actual episode, and this one was not bad. It had some issues, but there was like a genuine, I feel like I'm setting the bar so low for this, but man, the first 2 were very disastrous. There was a genuine sort of plot thread going through. They set up this tension and suspense of something at the beginning. They paid it off at various times through it. There was action.
A lot of action.
There were things that they raised and like had tension and suspense that sort of lingered through the episode, and then there was actually a payoff to
a planet exploded.
Look, this episode was far from perfect, but yeah, there was a lot going on here. And I was thinking as we were watching it about the fact that this originally aired as a 2-hour movie. And if you think about that, like, okay, the last 40 minutes of the 2-hour movie is the most exciting. Like, we're getting the stuff paid off, getting things resolved. And after the first 2 episodes, I was really like, man, how many of these are we going to make it through? Because I do not have that much in me. And I made it through this one. I'm like, okay, I still don't think I want to watch a whole season of this, but like I'm game for a couple more episodes and kind of see how it plays out.
This rejuvenated me a little bit.
Yeah.
Before we move away from the opening, though, I just wanted to real quick point out how funny
I mean,
it is.
10% of the episode before we get to anything new, so we can spend some time on it.
True. I think it's funny how every time Lorne Greene introduces himself as the voiceover guy, he's like, hi, I'm Lorne Greene. Last time on Battlestar Galactica. I'm like, it doesn't matter if it's you. You're getting paid the same anyhow. It doesn't matter if we actually know that it's you, Lorne Greene, that's introducing it. And also, why don't they do it in character as Adama?
That's the funny part. Like, so this is just in my head because I just read an article about something happening on the set of the new Mission Impossible where apparently Tom Cruise was yelling at people for not following COVID protocols, which Tom Cruise is a nutcase, but good for him. Like,
I agree. I totally agree. This was wise for him to do because this could set a precedent for how films are going to be made in the COVID. Hopefully, there's not much more of the COVID era left.
I mean, there's another six months of this at least. Yeah. There's a lot of productions that are going to happen. I know I've been dealing with students this semester who were on set shooting their movies and trying to do the COVID protocols. And look, I am happy to make fun of Tom Cruise for many things. I think we've actually made fun of him on Deja Reviewed before for many things.
Most likely.
But I appreciated it and him like saying like, this is, everyone's looking at us. We're the big production going on. We have to do it right. There are no excuses. And if you can't follow the rules, then get the hell off set. And
I totally agree.
Kudos to him for that. Anyway, that's why Mission Impossible was in my head. What I was going to say is, could you imagine if you go see the next Mission Impossible and it starts out with a voiceover, but instead of him as Ethan Hunt, it's like, hey, this is Tom Cruise.
Hi, I'm Tom
Last
Cruise.
time you saw Mission Impossible. Like, it's weird.
Now, totally weird. How much of it do you think is like, hey, remember me from Bonanza? I'm that guy from Bonanza.
Then he should just say that. I'm Lorne Greene from Bonanza.
Well,
and then he should start going,
I'm Boss Cartwright or whatever. Yeah, that was very, very strange. I'm sorry, though. Let's get into this episode.
So, yeah, this one was much better. And I actually noted right from my second note, because my first one is, and yet once again, we start with a giant 4-minute, let's redo the whole opening of the movie version. But my very first note after this says, hey, the opening of this is actually an interesting idea. They're going somewhere with this. And I loved this idea. This is, I know, something we talked about more with Twilight Zone than we have with Battlestar as we're sort of getting into this, but the sort of modern applicability and bigger themes and philosophical issues. It raises this question where Adama's looking at these reports and says, hey, all the intelligence we have about this planet came from one guy, and that's the one guy who turned out to be a Cylon traitor. We don't know anything. And I was like, that's actually really fascinating and something that certainly in intelligence, I think would be not intelligence smartness, but like national intelligence security sort of things. You're always looking at the sources and stuff. And what do you do if it turns out, we've had traitors, we've had people who turned out to be double agents. How do you then have to look back at all the stuff, every report you've ever gotten and try to figure out what's true or not? And I want to throw out 2 very relevant real world examples. One is something that I'm very cognizant of because there's been some issues in academic publishing. And academic publishing, people have probably heard the term like peer review. So basically like you write something and it goes out to other experts in your field who review it and decide if the work is good and should be published. And that's the idea of peer review. And generally it works, but what's interesting is it's based on the assumption that people are generally honest and telling the truth. So an example from my very niche subworld of like film sound is there was a paper that came out that got published, and a bunch of people were like, how did this get published? Particularly some people in the industry are like, this is just rife with inaccuracies. And I was talking with someone and said, like, this is part of the issue where the reviewers of this probably weren't experts enough in that field to know that. And they were assuming basic facts that are being posited were true and that the writer was not just flat out lying. This was issue we're still dealing with, very prevalent right now. The whole anti-vax movement basically came out of somebody completely fabricated data and got a paper published and widespread vaccine linked to autism. And it got through peer review because the analysis of the data presented was correct. The study setup seemed like it was done well. They didn't count on the person just literally lying and making up their own data and throwing out data that didn't fit. So it's based on this presumption of good faith. And then that one, of course, has had long-lasting consequences and is still going to be having very important consequences now when a lot of people don't trust vaccines, as we're looking at the COVID vaccine.
That's why in science, reproducibility is one of the most important things about actually proving a theory. Anyhow.
Yeah, and in that case, I think actually it should be, so that obviously was a disaster what happened with that paper, but it's a credit to science that got found out. They couldn't reproduce those results, nobody else's, and they found out that this was true and it got retracted. Like the process ultimately worked. But the first
people
part,
that are dumb enough don't follow up,
right? Which
to
is
the
true.
End of the path. Yeah.
The other thing, and this just came across my feed yesterday. I don't know how new the news is, but I had just seen it. There was apparently this famous award-winning story about in Japan, like families for hire. Have you heard about this?
I have not. And also, I will point out that we don't know when this is actually coming out, so this will definitely be old news at this point.
Definitely old news by that point. But so,
go ahead. Yeah.
It may have been old news when I heard about it, and now it's even older news.
It's definitely old news.
At any rate, the pandemic vaccine stuff, I think that'll still be current when this comes out in a few weeks. So
yeah.
But so there was this story that won awards like several years ago for outstanding reporting. That the magazine that published it has now, it was interesting. They haven't fully retracted it, but basically put a big like editor's note. And it was not that the reporter reported it badly, and they actually did their fact checking. And the fact checker found all the same information. It just turned out all the people they talked to were basically acting like they acted as this whole. And so it was this idea that the story was about in Japan that people were like hiring people to play family members. Like, oh, I don't have, I miss my dad. So you hire an elderly man who comes and pretends to be your dad and stuff. And all the people they talked to literally were just play acting that this whole thing was happening. And I'm like, at some level, like you can't, everything we do as a society at some level assumes people are operating on some modicum of good faith.
Yes.
And when that doesn't happen, the whole system falls apart. Anyway, I've rambled on, but that to me was just really interesting. This idea of like, what else do they only have Baltar's word for that turns out to be false because he was in cahoots with the Cylons?
Well, and I'm going to add one more because I think that's a great poll. And I actually have a modern applicability thing too. But in relation to this one, look at what the social media is doing now. Our social media, Facebook and Twitter, have literally started tagging certain things saying, hey, this is not factually accurate, because we are in a society that, a 10-second Instagram video or a Twitter blurb or a lot of people take that as news and take that on faith and don't consider sources. And especially when the administration has spent 4 years gaslighting us since 2016.
I shouldn't laugh.
That it's hard. Well, it's hard to be like, well, we should be able to trust the president of the United States and the administration, right? And I think finally the veil has been lifted off of hopefully some people's eyes that, oh no, you have to actually consider sources. You have to consider that Fox News wants viewers, and MSNBC and CNN, they need those things. The Twitter and Facebook, they want those clicks. So for them to take a step like that, where it's like, hey, this is false or misleading information, is frankly, I think, a pretty huge step and should actually be commended. I think Zuckerberg's a weird robot, speaking of Cylons anyhow, but I think that is something that they didn't have to do. And I think that actually was sort of important in insulating, hopefully getting a little bit further in the stupidity of this society as a whole away from that.
I agree it's a good step. I don't commend him maybe as much as you did, because I think it's clear that this was a huge problem already. they let it get huge and did nothing about it for a long time. And the only reason they're doing it now was because they saw legislation coming down the pipeline and said, if we don't do this ourselves, something much stronger is going to be imposed on us. It's the same thing that happened with the Hays Code, with the movies. Well, the MPA is a good example, but even before that, where there was going to be basically blanket censorship by the government of movies, like you can't show, and the movie studios came together and said, here's this code. We're going to make sure all our movies follow all these things. And we're doing it so that the government doesn't come in and tell us what to do. And I just see this as another case. Like, I think it's good. I'm absolutely for them doing this, but I don't think it should be commended. It's like if you were about to shoot somebody and saw the cops coming and like put down your gun so you don't get you get like holding up with a pistol instead of murder because you were going to get caught. That's the only reason you're doing.
That's a really good call. And see, that shows how naive I am. So
yeah. I will say one thing in the way that they've implemented that I actually like on Twitter is it's such a low bar, but it's amazing how much impact that can have. Just if you go to like retweet something that was like a link to an article, it pops up and says, hey, you haven't read the article you're retweeting. Are you sure you want to? And you can still click like go ahead and retweet it. But just making people take a second to think like, hey, I'm just passing this information on. Do I have any sense of what it is? I don't know how much of an impact that'll have, but past history seems to suggest that if you make something take 2 clicks instead of 1, that's a barrier for a lot of people.
Yeah. And to be honest with you, when I see something with a flag come up on it, and I've blocked President Trump. Oh God, this is the first time I called him President Trump. I blocked Donald the second he took office. So you normally don't see his stuff unless it's been retweeted
he has
by
you
someone
blocked
else
as well.
I hope so. But I would probably be more likely, or I would pay more attention. So this might be a little selfish by Twitter and by Facebook. If I see that flag, I'd be like, wait, what is this that's scrolling by in my feed? I would probably actually be more likely to look at something like that. So it might actually be for selfish purposes anyhow. Moving on from that, there's another very currently topical thing that I thought was reflected in this episode. The council is talking to Adama and talking about how, hey, if we just mind our own business and stay out of everything, the Cylons will just leave humanity alone, which frankly is kind of I know America took the forefront as like the police presence of the world, but a lot of people are like, hey, if we just stayed out of the Middle East, if we just fucked off and just stayed to our own stuff, maybe we wouldn't have all these problems. We wouldn't have warring countries. We wouldn't need to spend so much on a military. And this scene kind of made Adama look a little bit like a warmonger here, because he's like, oh no, we got to have a military and all this stuff. And I thought that now in 2020, watching this, and granted, isn't that long ago, but I was like, this is a relatively topical. People are still talking about this. Like, why do we need such a big military? Why are we interfering with all these other countries' governments? And frankly, it hasn't been as big of a concern today.
Right. We got plenty of our government interfering with our own government at this point.
Yeah, true. We're too busy keeping our own yard clean. But I thought that was a scene that resonated in 2020 still.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think it's worth noting that in some ways we're in kind of similar positions in the sense of in the late 70s, obviously we're out of Vietnam, but that would have been still very fresh in everyone's memory and this, getting embroiled there and what happened. And then, we are still currently in Iraq and in Afghanistan and these never ending ongoing conflicts. So I think that's similar. What I thought was really interesting in how they presented that scene was, I don't know if I would say it presents Adama as a warmonger, because he makes this very clear argument and the other people are like, but let's just throw away our weapons anyway. Because, what's the guy? Sai Yuri. God, I hate that guy. Which is good job, Battlestar. Like, you created a villain. Yeah. Which is nothing. Like, you gave us somebody to root against. It's like, we should just get rid of our stuff. The Cylons didn't bother us till we got involved in other things. And Adama's like, yeah, they were trying to enslave a planet and we stopped them from doing it. And then they were like guns, blowing up somebody else's planet and we stopped them from doing it. And Sayuri's like, yeah, we should have just let them do it. Like, the morality seemed pretty clearly on Adama's side, not like we should go find the Cylons and kick the crap out of them. It was like, we have some moral obligation to protect other people and do the right thing. And if the Cylons are attacking other people, we shouldn't just run and hide. Now, I will say the episode does get to sidestep this. Like, that really could have been a legitimate question. Like, if the Cylons were really just attacking because they thought it was a threat, would it do humanity more good to be isolationist, even if it means giving up some of their principles, or to stand on their principles and defend everybody? As it turns out, the episode doesn't want to have that full debate. So it's like, hey, actually, it turns out this whole thing's a Cylon trap, and clearly Adama's right, and we need to defend ourselves.
Yeah, and this whole episode and this whole first 3 episodes, this whole movie didn't do itself a service like the reboot did. And I have still not felt that desperate survival of humanity yet. Mm-hmm. And it's 3 episodes, 2 hours basically, and 2.5 hours through, almost 3 hours in, I think. And I have not ever felt that hopeless, oh God, we only have, I loved at the beginning of the reboot how they would always show like 66,000 people left, or they would have
and
their
the number would
population
change.
Count. Yeah, exactly. And there's no sense of urgency to that, which would have made the whole Rosalind versus Adama in the reboot. She was the good version of this council member,
right?
Whatever his name is again. She was like the one that you could understand and side with, that played against the militaristic, that was like, hey, this is more survival. This is a political thing. We got to run. We got to hide, versus Adama. And sometimes their 2 takes on survival cross paths, and they got along and it was great. It was more interesting when they were divergent, and especially when Rosalind was playing Apollo off of Adama and doing all those things. It was, we should really be watching the reboot.
But so yes, and that was fantastic. And like, look, so far anything in these first 3 episodes, any potential philosophical question, I feel like was raised better in the reboot.
Yes.
But given how bad the first 2 were, I think it's worth giving some credit here that they are asking some of these larger questions and bringing in some interesting things that do have bigger real world relevance and ideas worth talking about. I think it was so much more effective, as you mentioned, with Rosalind as the foil instead of Sayuri, who really just seems to be an idiot. Like,
and evil. Kind of incompetent evil.
Well, I actually wrote at one point, like, I can't tell if he's just dumb or if he's actually also in cahoots with the Cylons. And I don't think he is. I think it just turns out he's just like dumb and lazy, and hey, there's this place
which is also topical for this administration.
Right? But it was like, of all the times for nobody else to be, why is Adama the only one who finds it weird that this planet just like gives you unlimited money and food and you don't contribute anything? And Sayuri's like, this is fantastic. Let's just stay here and deal with this. And like, anyone with half a functioning brain is like, should we like look a little bit into this, figure out what the deal is here?
Absolutely. You mentioned bigger questions that this episode raised. I have some bigger questions about what this episode raises, but let's take a quick break and we'll come back and start diving a little bit more into the plot.
The warriors continue to advance at least 6 squadrons.
Recall all raiders to defend base ship.
Our raiders are all destroyed.
All destroyed. How? We took them by surprise.
Apparently it was not as big a surprise as we had hoped for.
All right, we are back, and we were kind of talking about how the reboot made the survival of humanity feel more desperate than this version of the series. I really liked the fact that the reboot took this celebration, because they were preparing for this celebration in this episode or in this movie, toward the end of this movie, and the Battlestar in the reboot got caught with their pants down because they were in the midst of this celebration. And they kind of had a little bit of that.
And it was being like decommissioned and turned into a museum.
Exactly. It was this celebration of the last Battlestar, and which was a much better way to do it in the reboot. And let's just assume anytime we reference the reboot, like you said, they did it better there. But I did like that there was this distraction, that there was this big distraction going on. And Adama had this actual good plot to disguise all of their like engineers and mechanics and stuff, put them in soldier outfits, send them down to Carolon, so the insect people thought
I think they said a name of them once, but I don't remember what it is.
So they thought all the soldiers were on Carolon, and so then they went to attack the Battlestar, and sure enough, the pilots were all still on the Battlestar fighting. I did think it was weird, Mark, that Adama couldn't figure out a better way to talk to Ty than having them both get into spaceships, get into Raptors, sit down, put the headsets on. Like, you could have just whispered in the corner. I guess Adama thought everything was bugged, and he was only letting in Ty, basically, on this plan, the Colonel Ty, to do this. I had the same beef with, and here's a Star Wars reference for you. I had the same beef with The Last Jedi, which I had so many beefs with The Last Jedi, and anyone that likes that movie remains wrong because it's bad. But when Laura Dern has this great plan in her head, and for whatever reason, she doesn't tell her best, most loyal pilot about the plan. Instead, she threatens to throw him in the brig. She pulls a gun on him. There was the same moment. What was the harm in telling Starbuck and Apollo and your good pilots, what was the harm in telling them the plan instead of them being surprised by it, other than, I guess, comedic moments?
Well, and the fact is, a lot of people were in on it because they needed all these mechanics and engineers dressed up, and then they needed all the other pilots except for Starbuck, Apollo, and Boomer were in on it because they were like in their combat gear ready to go. Yeah, but look, we keep saying, and it's true, that everything the reboot did was better, but this was a solid, there was a threat. It was a little unknown what it was, but he was suspicious. He came up with this plan. We got to see them sort of doing the plan, but weren't sure what was going to happen. And then we find out, he's right. It is a Cylon attack. And they follow through on that. Look, this was a perfectly reasonably plotted episode.
Agreed. It was just weird that the most trusted people, including his son, that they didn't bother cluing in.
They did try to excuse that one, though, which I'll give them credit for. They at least sort of foresaw that objection and said, if I told him, he'd refuse to go to the party and would insist on staying here. So they tried to justify it. It's not great. I was okay with it. I was laughing at the same thing about the only way they can find out to talk secretly is to get into the ships and talk on the headsets. And he's like, we're on my private channel. I'm like, I'm pretty sure it'd be easier for someone to tune into the comms
your private channel
than to overhear you if you just go to a deserted corridor and it's your ship. You know where the surveillance is and stuff.
Right.
He said maybe they bugged his room. They can't bug the entire Battlestar and be listening to it.
Listening the whole time. It was very strange.
Sayuri is so lazy. Do you think he would bother to listen to more than one bug? I don't believe he would actually even bug Adama's quarters. That seems like work.
In regard to you saying this, we didn't know exactly what was going on in Caroline. Here's another Star Wars reference for you. I was getting a very big sense of Bespin, where you knew from Empire Strikes Back, where you knew that there was something strange happening. Like Lando was greeting them, and you knew there was this sort of underlying. Obviously, later on we get 3PO getting blasted,
but even that we don't see what hits him. He's like,
exactly
what, and then gets blasted.
What are you doing here? Yeah, exactly. There's this sinister thing bubbling just beneath the surface, and I think they executed it pretty well.
So I agree, except no, this is, it bugged me because they were generally doing it so well, and I thought they missed a little bit of an opportunity where they reveal the Cylons and they show the Cylons talking with the bug people before the festivities even start.
Yeah, so, that's true.
We all think that Adama is right because clearly he's the hero of the show. Sayuri is painted as an idiot. So we know there is going to be a trap, but there's a little bit of suspense of is it the Cylons or is there just something else shady going on here? And they put that scene earlier and I was like, man, if I was editing this, I would have just moved that scene later
behind it. Yeah.
Right at, while the festivities are going on, oh crap, it is the Cylons. Just a line that I loved. I grabbed it. I might use it as one of our little bumpers on this episode. Talking about, so it's a trap, but then Adama has a trap for the Cylons because they come and they think they'll be defenseless, and then he has his fighters ready to launch. He launches them way too late. They've been shooting at the Galactica for a while, and they're like, "Hey, we should get the fighters in their ships and get them
should
up
we scramble
here.
The fighters?" He's like, "No, I'm finishing my conversation with Colonel Ty."
Well, did you notice how much he keeps running to places and suddenly barking out orders when this is going exactly as he had sort of foreseen and you assumed he had a plan for? Anyway, so the fighters do get up, the Vipers get up, they blow up all the Cylons, and there's this great conversation later between the Supreme, I keep calling him Supreme Leader. They actually name him as Imperious Leader. Between the Imperious Leader and one of the Centurions, where the leader is scramble all our fighters back here, and the Centurion's all the fighters are destroyed. And he's like, how? We caught them unaware. And the Centurion goes, apparently it was not as big of a surprise as we had hoped for, in this great robot voice. I'm like, I love that this Centurion is like being sarcastic to the like supreme leader. That amused me to no end, because I think of the Cylons as like no personality, just like these droneless robots. And that was definitely him sort of like, yeah, you really screwed the pooch on that one, didn't you? I loved it. I am going to put that in as a bumper. It was hilarious.
I agree. This was definitely the funniest episode so far, too. I really loved the interplay with Apollo and Starbuck acting like there were four, because they go to start attacking the base ship, and they were acting like there were 4 squadrons worth of ships. And then they mentioned like purple. I think it was Starbuck was like purple squadron.
Yeah, we got 2 more squadrons showing up. Apollo's like, I think we have enough squadrons.
That was a really good interplay, and it was frankly carried out better, not to harken back to Last Jedi, than Poe's stupid taunting at the beginning of Last Jedi, which was not charming and was not good at all. Like when he was making fun of what's his name.
I will push back on General Hux.
Thank you.
I will push back on that, in that I totally would agree if you said that had no place in a Star Wars movie. It is not the right style of humor for Star Wars. It was more like slapsticky, like something you'd see on SNL. I thought it was funny slapsticky. I was laughing hearing it, but it didn't fit the series to me.
I didn't think it was funny even. And I guess maybe it was because I didn't think it was funny because they turned Hux from this like scary Nazi-esque character, actual villain, into this
into
clown.
A buffoon.
Yeah. But
yeah, no, and again, I totally agree with you on it. Didn't work in the movie for that and all sorts of other reasons. But the idea of it, I thought was funny, and I liked the, it's an old joke, but sort of the like, Huck's like, yeah, I'm right here, and he's like, I'll wait whenever he's there, and like, just keep stretching it out. Anywho, it's funny you mentioned that, because the other bumper I grabbed to potentially use, we'll see what makes it into this episode, was that interplay about how many squadrons they have.
I think we're good with just the 4 that we have coming in. Yeah, I thought that was really funny.
Can I say Starbuck is a weird character in this episode, because I still feel like they're trying to figure out what to do with him and what he is. And sometimes he's like the ladies' man. Sometimes he's really heroic, like when he's going to stay behind and try to blow up the planet so Apollo can rescue the people. He kind of just like veers completely from like one side of his personality to another, all over the place. And I had a hard time getting a read on him. Whereas like Apollo, Boomer, Adama, Tai, Sayuri, like all of them, you kind of get who they are. And I'm not saying a person can't be complex, but it's like Starbuck, I felt almost like there's like a writer who writes comedy for him, and then a writer who like writes him as a hero, and they just like were alternating scenes, but like there's no connection.
I totally agree with you, and I actually think he's probably the best actor that they have. Maybe Lauren Green, but I think he's probably the best actor they have in this. You know what's funny is I don't get the sense in this version that Starbuck is the hotshot pilot, is the best pilot. It almost seems like, and I guess in the reboot, Apollo was a damn good pilot himself. But it was...
Yeah, but like that was sort of Starbuck's calling card in the reboot.
Like, she was the badass pilot.
She was the hot... And like if you needed like one pilot to go out and do something, Starbuck. You would send
exactly.
Starbuck.
And I don't get that sense as much from this one, but maybe they'll start to lean in. I mean, granted, we're only 3 episodes in. Maybe they'll start to lean into that a little bit more. But I totally agree with you. I think that they realized that they had something in Dirk Benedict, and they don't know how to write for Dirk Benedict yet. And of course, they're looking at Han Solo. But, I mean, if they're going to take cues from that, Han Solo was the shit as a pilot.
Right.
So just make your Starbuck the shit as a pilot and make him this cocky, swaggering. In regard to Starbuck being a ladies' man, one thing I did want to point out, I thought it was super sexist that all of the pilots, all the male pilots are down on Caroline in their full uniform, and Athena comes down in this like sexy dress. And I'm like, why is she not also in uniform coming down here? But anyhow, I thought that was a little bit of a bizarre choice.
That was another one where it seems like I know there was the scene with her at the lockers in the end of the first episode. It seems like they're trying to build up more of this backstory with her and Starbuck, but like aren't devoting enough attention to it to really make it play out. It's like you get one largely comedic scene in each case, in each of these 3 episodes, where there's like, yeah, there was some relationship and backstory between them, but we don't have enough info on it to be invested in.
For sure. When Starbuck, specifically in this one, Starbuck's hitting on another woman, and Athena comes up, and he kind of gets that Jack Tripper caught between 2 women, kind of juggling the 2 of them at the casino.
Right.
And she does reference she's like, I hurt you and all this stuff. She references their past again. Maybe it's the same relationship that they had in Mr. Denton on Doomsday, and we just don't need to know about it.
I forgot about that. That's a good parallel, particularly to the blonde woman, because my suspicion in Mr. Denton on Doomsday was also that she was a lady of the night there working in the bordello. I think you maybe raise a good point to, not to make excuses for the show, but one thing that I think is fair is, even though we're 3 episodes in, if we're thinking about this originally was all shot and aired as one long pilot, you're doing your pilot, and a lot of times there have been a lot of great shows where the pilot didn't quite work and they have to change some things up and figure it out over the years. And maybe during the pilot they sort of figured out, like, hey, we got something with this actor, but they hadn't figured out what to do with him yet. And we still really haven't seen a second new episode, after they had a chance to see how a whole episode played out, because all these were originally shot together. And I want to throw out, because this came up on a friend's Facebook feed this week, talking about shows to watch, and somebody had recommended Schitt's Creek, which my wife and I just finished, which was fantastic.
Yep.
We came to it very late. I realized it has been running for years and is actually already over now.
Doesn't matter.
But we just watched through it. But I really did not like the first few episodes of it. I thought they were taking the easiest way out on every joke. It was very stereotypical, and it wasn't until they sort of figured out what to do with those characters that it really hit. And once it took off, I think it was fantastic, and they had great episodes, great character development arcs, but they just didn't know what to do with those first few. And so somebody was writing like, well, why should I sit through a few episodes that aren't good to get to something good? It's like, well, yeah, if you can take something that's good from the get-go. And I actually mentioned, the Battlestar reboot as an example of that. Lost, I think, is an example. The original run of Futurama. Breaking Bad. Yeah, there are shows like that, but those are few and far between. A lot of really good shows, the first few episodes, like, they haven't figured out what to do with those characters yet. And so I'm willing to cut this a little bit of slack on Starbuck as they're figuring out. Now, we'll see if we get a few more episodes in and it's still the same all over the place. But given that this was still the first one, I'm willing to cut him slack. But it was weird. The one that jumped out the most to me was he's sitting with Boomer up on the dais, like, before the festivities are about to start and they're going to get their awards. And Boomer's pointing out, like, hey, do you know those guys? Like, they're wearing our insignia. And Starbuck's like, huh, that's weird. Let me go check it out. And then he runs into Apollo and he's like, I've been running into guys all night. Like, no, you haven't. You didn't even notice till Boomer pointed it out. But then they're immediately like, let's go investigate and get down into the lower levels and figure it out. And I'm like, that doesn't seem like the Starbuck we've seen thus far.
I am going to, to your point, add 2 more excellent series that I think had the same, they didn't know what they had until later. Mm-hmm. I would say Parks and Rec and 30 Rock. The first seasons, don't get me wrong, of both of those shows are good, but 30 Rock did not realize that the thing that was interesting was Alec Baldwin and Tina Fey's relationship. And and Parks and Rec didn't realize that the interesting thing was Ron and Leslie, Amy Poehler, and his name just fell out of my head, the guy from Minooka, Illinois, that's married to Megan Mullally. What the heck's his name? Who he plays Ron Swanson? No? Nothing. Anyhow, for whatever reason, I can't think of his name. But anyhow, they didn't realize what they had with the 2 of them until a little bit further into the series. And those first few episodes of the first season or so are definitely watchable. But it was very clear that 30 Rock thought that Jane Krasinski and Tracy Morgan were going to be the driving comedic force behind that show. And they realized, okay, yes, they're the bombastic, crazy comedy. And like, we have something a lot more subtle here with Tina Fey and Alec Baldwin's characters that they realized was the heart of the show. And frankly, you weren't going to get those really heartfelt moments with Tracy Morgan and Jane Krasinski that you were with Tina Fey and Alec Baldwin.
And what they figured out to do, I think you nailed it exactly right. What they figured out to do that was so smart is they built it around Alec Baldwin. Once they knew what they had, built it around Alec Baldwin and Tina Fey and their relationship. And then in every episode, there'll be some crazy subplot involving Tracy Morgan or Jane Krasinski, because they can be the crazy people,
like Kramer,
with those other 2 as like the straight people. Yeah, you can't build a show around Kramer. Yeah, I'll throw out 2 more in that vein that didn't figure it out right from the start. Friends, which I think a lot of people would say was like the quintessential sitcom of the late 90s, early 2000s. If you watch the pilot for that, like, they do not know who those characters are. They haven't figured them out at all. And once the actors got into them and the writers figured out what to do with them, they came up with something that had a lot more staying power and a lot of funny parts. But the first episode is like almost unwatchable if you knew who those characters become, because they're not playing them yet. The other one, which Mike, I know you were also a fan of, and was one of my favorite shows what was on, was Fringe.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, amazing television, but oh my God, the first probably half a season, it's like 11 or 12 episodes that are really not good. And I know a lot of people gave up on that show, myself included.
Me too.
And then when it was at like season 2 or 3, and I was hearing from people how good it was, like, let me give it another chance. And you get past those first 11 or 12 and they figured out what they had and it gets really good. But that's a lot to ask in that case of an audience. You're asking for somebody to sit through half a season before you figure out what your show is.
Nick Offerman, for the people that were screaming at their I'm sorry about that, Nick. No, I totally agree, especially on Fringe. I was definitely one of those people who completely abandoned it. And I had a friend that was basically begging me to get back into giving it another shot. And when I finally did, to be fair to Fringe, you can skip a lot of the early episodes because it was kind of more Monster of the Week that was tangentially tied to this bigger plot without, you would still understand it. And frankly, you could probably just start in the last season and understand Fringe as well as I understood Fringe because it got super confusing toward the end. But what a great show that turned into and I totally agree with you. I probably watched first maybe 8 episodes, 10 episodes. I think I stopped the episode before where most people said that it got great, and it did get great.
I think what they were doing was trying to model themselves after X-Files.
Exactly.
And what worked really well with X-Files was they did have this overarching mythology, but it came out in drips and little bits here and there, and it really was most of the time a Monster of the Week sort of episode. But the thing there that really people tuned into X-Files for Dana Duchovny and Gillian Anderson and like their chemistry and their relationship and interaction. That's really was the core of that show. Fringe was much more an idea-driven show. It was about that big mythology. And I think what they didn't understand at the beginning was they thought we'll get little bits of this while we're doing the Monsters of the Week. And nobody cared about the Monsters of the Week. It was the mythology was the heart of that show. And I don't mean to discount the characters because they had some great characters. Walter on Fringe, I love. You know, we were talking at one point about writing a character in another script kind of based around a similar type of character because he's very memorable. And so the characters were great and everything, but you tuned in every week to like get more of like what the hell is going on with this larger mythology and multiverse. And
for sure. And what's funny about that is I haven't watched a ton of X-Files, but I found the actual Monster of the Week stories in Fringe to be more interesting most of the time than what I had seen of X-Files. So I get it, and I totally understand where people are coming from, but I think that some people lost the trees because they were hoping to see more of the forest, and there were some decently interesting trees, I thought, even at the beginning of Fringe. But what Fringe turned into was definitely not what it was in the first, 2/3 of a season.
So bringing us back to Battlestar.
Can we talk about Fringe?
Could I throw out? So they have this kid, Jane Seymour's kid, who has been recurring through these. I don't know if he actually continues through the rest of the series or not. I almost got the sense that was going to be a sort of guest star plot, but we'll see. This is the same kid, to be clear, that in episode 2, they let sort of run out onto a foreign planet that they knew nothing about and like... Then they wait like 5 minutes, like, I guess we should go look for him. And it turns out he's been found by the aliens, and thankfully they get him back because at this point we think the aliens are friendly. And
Is it thankfully?
Would you like to be reunited? Well, but then in this episode, they're like at the party, and once again, the kid runs off after his robot dog, and Apollo and the mom are just sort of hanging out there chatting with each other, not because they didn't notice that he ran off. There's like, kids run off places.
This
like,
is a perfect
idea. Do you remember you just lost him and he got found by weird aliens who, for all we know, could have eaten him? And you let exactly the same thing happen. And sure enough, the kid finds his way down to where all the aliens are again, which, by the way, I got the thing with Apollo and Starbuck, like blowing up the elevator controls so that they could hotwire and get down. Did you notice that even though originally nobody could get to these lower levels, suddenly like the kid just randomly gets on an elevator and ends up down at the lower level? Boomer ends up at the lower level when he's like looking for Apollo and Starbuck. I'm like, did that like blow up their whole security system too? Like this is very coincidental that everyone just now can get down to this secret hidden base level.
I'm glad you brought up that scene because when Apollo blasts the elevator controls, it looks almost exactly like in A New Hope when Luke shoots the bridge controls. It almost looked like when they blasted out the guts that they used the same electronic guts that come out after he blasted it. I thought that was wild.
It's either the exact same sound effect or they changed it just enough to not get sued by Lucasfilm. But no, it's that scene shot in the same way with the same production design and the same sound.
It was basically shot for shot that shot. I do have in my notes, in relation to your point, Muffet, the robotic dog, is going to get everyone killed. Because he is the reason that the kid, and I forget the kid's name is something stupid. Muffet's the reason the kid jumps on the elevator and ends up in the basement. Right. Boxy is the kid's name. Ugh.
Parents, don't name your kids Boxy.
Muffet kind of reminded me of, again, A New Hope, the first scene early on in the movie when the stormtroopers and the rebel soldiers are shooting each other on Leia's ship, and R2-D2 and C-3PO just cross across the shot, and there's these laser bolts just shooting all around them, and they just are casually walking across the shot of this laser battle. I thought that was kind of harkened back to that.
That's a great reference.
Thank you. Is this
they need to just like do something about that robot dog because it is going to get everyone killed.
Not cute.
It's gotten the kid lost twice.
It's not cute. Like Baby Yoda, and I haven't caught up to this new season, so don't tell me anything about it, but Baby Yoda in The Mandalorian is like, I don't know how they researched him so well. He's like heart-achingly cute every time he comes on screen. This robotic dog is not cute at all. It's not worth looking at. So I thought that was kind of strange.
Do you get the feeling with the robotic dog that like the production designers saw that in the script and like, wait, you want to what robotic dog? Like, we spent all the money on the bridge and the uniforms. You didn't tell us we needed a robotic dog. Like, yeah, just whip something up. They're like, all right, but I only have $5 left in the budget, so you're going to get what you get for $5.
Is there a person in that, or is that a costume around a dog? Like, because it seems to be, I don't know what that thing actually is. It moves weird.
I can't tell.
Yeah, me neither.
It looks like a weird looking dog that they just put duct tape around it at random parts to make it partly robotic, except it's like not quite a dog shape.
It looks like a Furby in the face as well to me.
You might be right. If it might be a like a small person, like a kid or something in a costume. The like limb lengths relative to the body and stuff, it feels closer to a human but I don't know.
That's a flexible kid then.
They made something that doesn't look like a real dog.
Yeah.
So I guess if that was the goal, to make it feel like something that wasn't a real dog, they accomplished
Which
that.
Is weird because
but they just made it something weird.
In the fiction, they wanted it to look like a real dog to replace his dog.
And so the designers are like, you know, it would look like a real dog if we put like metal bolts and like rivets and stuff on the outside of it sticking out and make sure the fur doesn't cover them.
Is this the first time that we've heard them use frack as a swear? Because it
might have been.
That was one of my favorite parts.
I didn't even think about that because that was so big from the
great
reboot.
Part of the reboot. Great idea to get around censorship, to just invent your own swear word. And Starbuck, I think it was Starbuck. It was either Starbuck or Apollo that used it at one point toward the end of the episode when they're fighting within the subterranean area. I think it was there, or maybe it was in the ships. No, I think it was in the subterranean area. And he says frack. And I think that was the first time I had noticed it. That was a great contribution by this show that was a great idea.
That was very smart. I want to mention a production thing about the battle in the dark tunnels there. Which, first off, just the Cylons may be worse shooters than the Stormtroopers, which is saying something. Like, they're at, like, point-blank range, and, like, Starbuck is able to take out, like, 5 of them in a row, and the Cylons are, like, shooting everywhere except where any people are. What I noticed is, it's interesting because they're clearly modeling it off some of the Star Wars Stormtrooper battles and some of the blaster battles there. And what they're forgetting is you can do more with film than you can in 1970s era TV. It just doesn't have the kind of dynamic range to it. And they're shooting in these dark tunnels, and you just end up with a lot of image that you can't really make out much of what's going on. And maybe that's intentional because it's low budget and they're trying to hide it. But, you know, Derek said this was pretty high budget as TV
had to have been.
And I don't think I didn't get the sense that they were trying to hide things, because when things were lit up or there was a blaster blast, like, it looked like where they were supposed to be in these tunnels. I think they just weren't thinking about how this is going to look on a 1970s era TV set and what that's capable of showing. And so you just ended up with a lot of the images sort of falling off to blackness, darkness, and you couldn't make anything out. That's it.
That said, though, did have a note in here that we finally got some good, decent action, and we alluded to it at the beginning of this episode. When they're having their little battle down in the caves, you probably will be able to guess what they find all these people in these little pods, these little like compartment. Basically, it looks like a morgue. It looks like the drawers that you slide.
It looks like a honeycomb.
Yeah,
morgue.
exactly. Yeah, and so as I think they get one person out of them or something like that, and then
let's be clear, they see like all these people stuck in them, and someone's like actually kind of moving, fighting to get out, and they're like, "Well, that sucks," and they walk away, and then Starbuck finds like the hooker that he liked from before, and like, "Oh, let's free her."
Worse than just walking away, because they start a fire right next to the honeycomb area and then just walk away from it there. But that honeycomb thing, if we're talking about current-ish sci-fi, definitely reminded me of The Matrix, when all the people are stuck in their little bubbles as batteries, or the little cells as batteries. It just had that look to it. I don't know if you got that same sense.
Yeah, good reference there. Yeah, I didn't think of it that way, but yeah, that definitely. I mean, I liked the idea design-wise that if the aliens are going to be insect-like, that they would build a sort of honeycomb thing and store their food in it. I'm like, okay, there's some thought behind that. I dig it.
Did you like how that Battlestar had their own version of Porkins from A New Hope? Because they had one...
Where did that guy come from?
But they had one fat, mustachioed pilot that was involved, although he didn't die as far as I could tell.
No, wasn't he the same guy who was sleeping in the bunk beds when Ty goes to like steal all the... Because there's like one guy who kind of like rolls over, like checks his uniform and then sits back and like lays back down.
Yeah, they're probably trying to make that guy a character, because at one point he's like, "Oh yeah, they switched all our uniforms out with the engineers." He's like, "You should see the one that got mine," which I thought was kind of a funny line.
I'll be curious to see if he comes back. I think they just felt like they needed one more beyond Starbuck, Apollo, and Boomer.
Someone that we'd recognize.
And it almost felt like they're like auditioning this guy. Like, let's see if he sticks.
You know what I really liked in the reboot that they didn't do here?
A lot of things.
Yes. But the Cylon ships were just the whole organism. Like they were their own robot, or what, like their own half robot. Mm-hmm. And in this one, they actually have the Cylons, 2 Cylons even, flying each one of their ships, which I thought that was a great, super cool addition to the remake. That, hey, if they're building machines, if they're just, these machines have been smart enough to self-replicate and make other machines, why would you make a machine that a different machine has to fly? Why not just make the machine so their ships are all just their own sentient beings themselves too, which I thought was a really cool choice.
I thought that was really cool in the reboot. I think that's one that, something we talk about a lot when we were doing the Twilight Zone was what audiences were accustomed to and such. And I feel like at this point, that might have been a lot to ask of audiences to immediately buy into. Like, I think it's easier to understand these sort of humanoid robots flying the ships. And you could extend that logic, like, why do the Cylons need guns? Why don't they just build robots that are themselves guns?
True. Yeah, that's true.
Which they kind of did in the reboot. So yeah, I thought that was definitely a really cool thing in the reboot, and particularly the base ships and like the sort of controls of those and how their psychology worked and stuff was really
the
fascinating.
Base ships / Star Destroyers, clearly that they are in this. When they first see the base ship, when Apollo and Starbuck first see the base ship, because I was curious to see what it was going to look like, because they were cool and intimidating looking in the reboot. I thought they looked very cool here, but when it first like crested around came into view, I was like, it kind of looks like a Star Destroyer. I mean, it's a very round looking Star Destroyer, but
they have like the 2 lobes. It almost looks like a flattened out dumbbell.
Yes.
When you kind of see it. Yeah, those were cool. I mean, I think they've done some. There's a lot of ripping off of Star Wars, obviously,
which we keep.
But they did come up with some uniqueness of their own things that the reboot. I don't want to say standing on the shoulders of giants, because this is definitely not a giant, but standing on the shoulders of like a kid or something. Like, there was some work they did here that the reboot was able to take advantage of in terms of some of the design, the language and things. And I like the sort of rounded double bell spaceships. I don't feel like I had seen something exactly like that in something else.
For
it felt kind of unique to this.
Yeah, for sure. One thing that I had to clarify with you, because I must have missed this, and the connection, I didn't want to mess with my connection and try and go back and figure out if I had just missed something.
I like your optimism that you think you missed something and not just that they forgot to put it in the episode. Because definitely as I've been watching these, if there's something I don't get, I'm like, well, they should have explained that. I just assume it was their fault.
I think I missed something because originally Starbuck, when they're down in the caves, Starbuck suggests that he's going to go and basically blow up their gas or whatever they're mining, this explosive thing, and blow up the planet, which in my head, I'm like, wait, are there no innocent people on this planet? But that was the plan. Apollo's like, I'm not leaving you. Starbuck doesn't actually do anything to the planet, right? Because then I think the idea was to lure the base star low enough to the planet that it would blow up the planet. Was that the plan? How does the planet blow up?
Okay, so here's how I saw things playing out.
Okay.
Their plan that they're talking about there is Apollo was going to go out and sort of sneak everybody away before the Cylons knew they were onto them.
Right.
Once everybody was off, Starbuck was going to blow up the mining operation, which would blow up the planet. I don't think they knew there was a base star nearby at that point.
Correct.
And his point, which I thought was really smart, he said this place could be providing fuel for the entire Cylon fleet. Like if we blow this up, the Cylons can't chase us.
Yes.
That was the idea, which was smart. Like that's a great plot point.
And just to be clear, I'm not only talking about getting away the people that were in that party. I'm talking about you blew up an entire planet. There were certainly other people other than in this tiny little casino. That's what I mean about blowing up the planet and killing a bunch of innocent people. Anyhow, go ahead.
Well, it didn't see because there were not natives to that planet who were people. The natives were the insect things, and clearly to Starbuck they were less than human and their entire civilization can just be wiped
Certainly
out.
In an ecosystem they were like I'm just saying he killed a lot more people.
No, but because they even said like there's no food or any life on this planet, like anything has to be shipped in.
Okay.
Like I think those insects were just there to man the mining
I just want to make
operation.
sure.
I don't think the planet was inhabited, at least from what they said. But I don't think their plan involved the base ship. Then once the Cylons show up and they start a firefight, they just start setting the whatever crystal or chemical it is on fire around the place, knowing it will spread and eventually the planet will blow. I thought it was sort of convenient that the base star ends up like low, getting blown up on the planet. I don't think that was originally their plan. I think they got kind of lucky.
Okay, I must have missed them starting the fires then. Because either my NBC just skipped over it or I had to refresh at that point because I missed the part. That's what I was curious about.
I mean, they were basically just shooting it with their blasters, but they say, like, shoot the crystals. It'll catch on fire or whatever. Like,
got it.
They say something about it.
Okay, I missed that part because I was curious if the base star getting close because it got all, like, lightning-y and, like, sort of force lightning-y when it got close to the planet. I was like, is something with the base star interfering with the ore or whatever on the planet, the flammable stuff on the planet? Is that what blew up the planet? But it was them shooting those things that blew up the planet and engulfed the base star.
Yes.
Okay, so that's what happens. And then
I'm not saying it made sense as a plan.
No,
but
that's
I'm saying that is how I interpreted what happened.
Okay, good. Okay, that makes more sense than what I thought had happened. So then there's an obvious Death Star explosion at the end. As the planet explodes.
Which again was almost a like shot for shot remake of the Death Star blowing up, except without a Death Star, it was the planet.
Exactly.
Instead.
And then at the end, they reveal their plan to send Baltar back to humanity with a base star as a gesture of goodwill. And I didn't quite understand what that meant.
Well, Mike, you got it. So like, I'll take currently, let's say Russia is one of our enemies. Obviously, you would feel better about making a truce with Russia if they like flew an ICBM over here and like parked it right outside the White House and said, "Hey, we want a truce."
That's right? Funny you say that because I'm like, what is going to prevent them from attacking this base star? Because that was a bit. Remember, and speaking of those sentient ships in the reboot, remember when Starbucks crash landed on that planet in the reboot? She takes over. She hijacks one of the Cylon ships, and she has to convince them not to shoot her down when she's trying to approach the Battlestar. What's going to prevent them from just attacking this base star? And why is Baltar, why is Baltar capable of flying a base star? I didn't understand what the olive branch is.
Well, the funny thing is, you raise a completely good point. Like, if you see a base star coming,
shoot it.
Aren't you going to blow it up? And then I'm imagining them like hailing, like, no, it's me, it's Baltar. Like, oh, it's Baltar. Yeah, really blow it up.
Blow it up twice. Blow it up and piss on the ashes. Yeah, so I thought that was kind of strange.
I don't get that. I guess we'll see how that plays out. I want to bring up something from that end scene. So this was interesting because it had an ending voiceover from Adama, who did not
from Lorne Green. Hi,
I was going to say, did
Lorne
not
Green.
introduce himself as Lorne Green at the ending. He was in character as Adama at this point. And I thought that was going to be the end of the episode. And then it was like there was the surprise scene after where we're back on the base star. So this is where we learned that the Supreme Leader, Imperious Leader, whatever his name is also a robot. Because I had been thinking the whole time he was one of these reptile people.
Yes.
He says, my predecessor was programmed at a time when our empire was less capable of tolerance. I'm like, predecessor was programmed. Okay, he's a robot. I love this line. Now that we're omnipotent, we can afford to be more charitable.
Yes, yeah.
But I'm like, that is super relevant today. It's like, you were talking about the U.S. as like the world's cop. It's like, yeah, we're the one superpower. We can take care of everything and help everybody out and stuff. Not that I am arguing against that, but it was a really interesting saying we're omnipotent so we can be charitable. I thought it was fascinating. And then they also reveal at the end another different model of Cylon that comes out and they like freeze frame on. And that called forward to, I guess, or the reboot called back to this. Remember, right from the first episode, Adama gets this message like there are however many different kinds of Cylons. And I'm like, okay, so now we've got the Centurion model. We've got this new one that's just introduced at the end that we don't find out anything about. And the Supreme Leader seems to be a different model. So far we've seen 3 different models of Cylons. And that was interesting. And I will say, I thought was a good ending for this. Like, it was the kind of thing like, I want to tune in next week and find out more about this new kind of Cylon.
I totally agree. I will say when it freeze framed, I was cursing NBC.com, like this goddamn website. I legitimately thought that my feed had frozen once again. I want to call back.
Did you think it looked a little bit like the aliens from Mars Attack?
100%. It was super weird looking. I don't know if they're going to execute this well, certainly not as well as in the reboot, but I did love the fact that they're trying to actually give us a sympathetic villain. Like they actually are trying to build some sort of, the only good villains are ones that you can actually connect to, and actually, like, you can't have that Snidely Whiplash mustache twirling villain all the time and make anyone want to connect with them. It's like, okay, well, they're just pure evil, so I have no sense of connection with that villain. The best villains are the ones that you can, from The Rock.
I was going to just say The Rock, like Ed Harris, like you totally understand why he's doing what he's doing and why he feels like this is his only way out, even though he is the antagonist of the main character.
And he's going to do, well, and we find out, of course, he's not going to try and do something horrible, but he's threatening to do something absolutely horrible and villainous and irredeemable for very noble, redeemable causes, which is why he's such a great quote-unquote villain, because he's almost the hero.
100%.
And again, you have to always think, and this is, if anyone's a writer, if you're ever trying to write for a villain, you have to write from the perspective of the villain thinking that they're the hero, because no villain thinks that they're being villainous except for stupid, melodramatic, like hacky villains. Villains think that they're the heroes, remember? Like, the Galactic Empire thought they were keeping order throughout the galaxy. They thought that they were stopping these ragtag rebels. Like, you have to keep in the back of your head, hey, why is this villain motivated this way? Because they think they're the good guys. Those are the best villains that you're ever going to write. So I like that they did that with the Cylons.
if you have some power that has something called the light side and the dark side, and you're on the dark side, you should maybe rethink if you're really the hero in
that
the
is
story.
True, and they do
and
refer to it as the dark side.
They refer to it themselves as the dark side.
Very true. But just hearkening back to Star Wars, the intriguing part of that story is watching Vader's fall and rebirth and those things. But Vader, I think, never really thought I maybe fell into this depression when Padme passed away. However you want to justify his fall to the dark side, but I don't think Vader ever. I think he thought he was so far down a path, and that's kind of his speech in Return of the Jedi to Luke. It's too late for me. I'm so far down this path. I can't go back from it. Like, basically, the Anakin Skywalker is dead, where I'm Vader. There's sympathy. And frankly, even if you do end up with a pure evil character, even if Vader ended up being pure evil, the Emperor is a good example of this. I think he was just a sneaky politician. And if we got a backstory of the Emperor, there would probably be likable moments of the Emperor. Granted, it was not very likable watching Hayden Christensen stumble around in the prequels, but like we got, oh, this person was once in love. This person felt things. This person built this robot that he loved. This person has things that I can relate to.
Well, and whether you like the prequels or not, and I particularly don't, but why did people want the prequels? Because you wanted to see how this person
became Vader.
It wasn't because you're like, yeah, Darth Vader is just all evil. It was because you knew he was once good, and people wanted to see how did that happen.
Yeah, and want him to go back to being good again, or want that redemption arc to come full circle. And I like, again, we'll see. I don't know how, like you mentioned, how far we're going to make it into this. We'll see how much they pay this off. But I like the fact that they are, in their own twisted way, trying to do what they think is good. I liked that drop in a lot.
Yeah, no, and it's an interesting twist because it does make the Cylons less this unrelenting enemy. We have to kill them at all costs because they're going to kill us at all costs. They've now laid down a marker for the audience that, like, at least the current now leader of the Cylons is open to a truce and peace with humanity. And how do we play that out? Now, granted, how the humans are going to feel about accepting a truce with somebody who just wiped out all of their worlds and 98% of their population is certainly an open question, but it's different than when they were just always the enemy, always attacking.
And it's funny because in the reboot, that's basically what it was. Other than the Cylons that had infiltrated into, Boomer and Colonel Ty.
No spoilers, Mike.
Well, the ones that had actually infiltrated into humanity, that you got that empathetic sense of, oh, they're struggling with what is humanity, what is real. But the Cylons, that when you were describing them as this unstoppable force that's just coming to wipe out humanity, that's kind of what they were as a whole in the reboot. And it worked for their purposes for that really well. But I like how they did it in this one.
Yeah. Totally agree. I thought it was a very natural ending when it sort of had the voiceover, but I was also like, okay, this just feels a little stock, like, here's our ragtag fleet of blah, 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 and that'll be the end. And this was a nice little tag scene that did raise some different questions and challenges and new directions for them to go. Like I said, I thought it was a really good way to, if you imagine having watched this all as the 2-hour pilot, a way to end that and get people to say, yeah, like, I'll tune in next week and keep watching this show.
Speaking of natural endings and tuning in next week,
can we wrap this up?
Should we rate this thing?
Also, before we leave, can I just point out, Mike, we got some more matte painting, which I know you love, from Twilight Zone, and now we're seeing them in Battlestar too. So I thought that was a fun callback to
very obvious matte paintings, yes.
Or season 1, sorry.
So, Mark, should we rate this thing?
Yeah, I'm going to, again, we've only seen 3 episodes, so it's very hard to know what the scale is, and I'm trying to scale our scale to Battlestar.
Yeah, exactly.
Because, like, look, I don't think any of these original ones are going to be at the level of the reboot, so if it was scaled to, like, all TV you could ever watch, these are all, like, ones and 1.5s. But scaled to what we have seen thus far and what we were expecting of this, I'm going to give this a 4. I've been the first 2 were like, oh God, how are we going to get through this? And I was like, okay, I was entertained for 2/3 of that episode, and it had some fun stuff going on and raised some questions. Like, I felt like this was, I think, about the best I am able to hope that this show will be. So I'm going to give it a 4.
100% agree. That's exactly where I came in. And just so you know, it's 4 out of 100. No, it's 4 out of 4 out of 5 stars. But I thought the exact same thing. And I think we do need to adjust our rating scale to the show. Because like we mentioned it multiple times with Twilight Zone. Yes, if we're watching this doesn't make sense in 2020. And there's issues with gender. There's things that would not fly in 2020. And no, we shouldn't. And so we did kind of start adjusting to, as a Twilight Zone episode, is this good?
Yeah, and later in the season, we had to readjust some because, like, look, the first couple episodes, we had nothing to compare it to, so some of them we were a little too harsh or a little too lenient on.
This was
based on the 3 episodes we've seen.
Definitely better than the first 2 episodes, no question. It had some tension, some action, some decent effects have kept up. I've been consistently surprised by the effects. Mm-hmm. And I had a much better experience with NBC. I only had to refresh a couple times, so it only took me about an hour to watch this episode, which probably...
What's your rating on NBC streaming out of 5?
That would be a 0. It is absolutely terrible, but it was actually better this time, so that helped.
See, I think this episode might have been up to a half from 0.
Yeah, exactly. So, Mark, now we've got another 2-part episode coming up. We're only going to watch the first part for our next episode. Should we guess what it's about?
Yeah. So the title is Lost Planet of the Gods Part 1. I can't imagine they'd go back to this well already, but given the title, I feel like it's going to be they land on some other planet to get some resources or something, and yet again, it seems like a utopia or paradise, but something is not all as it seems.
That would be my guess as well. I think I'm going to actually harken back to a Twilight Zone episode when Roddy McDowell lands on the planet. I wish I could think of the name of the actual episode title. We covered it in Deja Vu, the first season. And he ends up in a cage with himself. And the reason I think of that episode is because everyone was dressed like they were on Mount Olympus. Like everyone was wearing togas.
Right.
And it makes me think, so I suspect that this is going to be, they can't have gotten to Earth. When they say Lost Planet of the Gods, they can't have gotten to Earth by now. But I think you're right. They're going to find this either 13th colony type planet, this mythological, not Earth specific planet, but this mythological planet that it's like Atlantis, that they thought had been lost to the ages, and they're going to land there and encounter some difficulties.
Okay. And if that is correct, so I think that's a great guess. They mentioned in this episode the Lords of Kobol, which repeatedly came up in the reboot, and I was never clear if those were actual things that had existed or if they were their gods or deities. And so maybe you're right, if they can't be at Earth yet, maybe they find Kobol.
That would be I feel like the series should just end at that point though, but we'll see if it does. Thank you all for listening. This was Deja Reviewed. If you do want to watch along with us, we are now we're on episode 4 on the NBC.com app. You can watch full episodes there for free, the app or on NBC.com. We'll be watching episode 4. It's called Lost Planet of the Gods Part 1. If you are enjoying Deja Reviewed, please leave us a rating and a comment wherever you're listening to us. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please subscribe. You can find us at DejaReview.com, where you can find all of our social media. You can send us a tweet, leave us a voicemail or a text message, and we hope to see you again next time.
Deja Reviewed.
You forgot to say our usual, this is not a politics podcast, before we go into a 40-minute rant about politics.
I think people know that we are technically a politics podcast.
What about those people who this is their first episode tuning in, Mike? They don't care about Battlestar Galactica episodes 1 and 2, but they really want to know about episode 3.